Without me, you are nothing, my husband announced to our circle, his voice dripping with expensive scotch and arrogance. The crowd laughed, a brittle sound that cracked against the city skyline. I simply smiled and raised my glass, playing the role of the decorative wife to perfection. He thought he was winning, but I was not drinking. I was waiting for the notification that would freeze his assets at exactly dawn. My name is Elena, and for the last 3 years, I have been an accessory to a life that looked perfect from the outside. The wind on the rooftop terrace of the Sterling Heights building whipped at my silk dress, but I did not shiver. My husband, Richard, stood in the center of a circle of his admirers, holding court with a tumbler of whiskey in one hand and a cigar in the other. He gestured toward me, his eyes glazed with that specific mix of alcohol and narcissism that passed for charisma in this city. "Look at her," Richard announced, his voice booming enough to cut through the ambient jazz. "Beautiful, isn't she? But let's be honest, without me, you are nothing. Elena, just a pretty face in a rented dress?" The silence that followed was brief, shattered almost instantly by the sycophantic laughter of his friends. They were the kind of people who measured worth in stock options and summer homes. I felt the heat rise in my cheeks, not from shame, but from a cold, simmering rage I had learned to suppress. Everyone expected me to crumble. They expected the tears or the scene or the quiet retreat to the bathroom. Instead, I smiled. It was a practiced expression, one I had perfected in the mirror for months. I raised my crystal flute in a silent toast, accepting the humiliation as if it were a compliment. I played the role of the decorative wife, the mute statue in his museum of success. Richard nodded, satisfied. His eyes lingered on me for a second longer, a sharp warning that I better not ruin his night. I brought the glass to my lips but did not sip, the sparkling cider masquerading as champagne bubbled against my lip. I needed a clear head. I was not drinking because I was waiting for a vibration in my clutch, a specific notification that would signal the end of this charade. The ride home was suffocating. The leather interior of the car smelled of his cologne and the stale smoke of the party. Richard drove with one hand on the wheel, aggressive and fast, weaving through the late-night traffic of Silver City. "You were too quiet tonight," he muttered, not looking at me. "People notice when you just stand there. It makes me look like I bore you. I was just listening." "Richard," I said softly. "Listening." He scoffed. "You wouldn't understand half of what we were discussing anyway. Leave the thinking to me. Elena, I hold the purse strings. I make the decisions. You just exist. Try to be grateful for the lifestyle I provide. My mother thinks you are ungrateful. And frankly, I am starting to agree with her." I turned my head to look out the window so he would not see the expression on my face. When we arrived at our sprawling, modern estate, Richard headed straight for the liquor cabinet in the living room. I slipped away down the hallway, past the master bedroom, and into the small guest room I used as an office. He called it my hobby room. He had no idea what was actually in there. I locked the door and sat at the plain wooden desk. My hands were steady as I reached into the bottom drawer and pulled out a nondescript gray folder. It was heavy. Inside lay the autopsy of our marriage, not in emotional letters, but in bank statements, routing numbers, and photocopied deeds. It was a rigorous indictment I had spent 6 months compiling. I placed my phone on the desk and dialed a number I had memorized. It rang twice before a deep voice answered. "This is Elias," the voice said. "It is Elena," I replied, my voice stripping away the softness I used with Richard. "He is home. He is drunk. We are clear." "Are you sure you want to proceed with the aggressive timeline?" Elias asked. "Once we file this motion, there is no going back. The assets will be locked down by tomorrow morning. Activate the plan," I said, my tone flat and final. "I want the freeze order executed at dawn. 6 o'clock in the morning. Understood. The papers are ready to be served. I hung up and looked down at the documents. Richard thought I was a scorned woman who would eventually try to divorce him for infidelity. He thought I would fight for alimony. He was wrong. I was not freezing our accounts because I was jealous of his mistress or angry about his insults. I was freezing them to stop a felony in progress. I was not just leaving a bad husband. I was severing ties with a criminal who had been using my social security number to wash his dirty money. And when the sun came up, he would realize that the nothing he married had just become his judge, jury, and executioner. Sitting in the silence of my home office, I let my mind drift back to the beginning, back to the version of Richard I thought I had married. We met 3 years ago at a charity fundraiser in Oak Haven, a small coastal town far removed from the steel and glass canyons of the city. He was not wearing the bespoke Italian suits he favored now. That night, he wore a simple cashmere sweater and looked at me with eyes that seemed desperate for something real. "I hate the city," he had told me as we stood near the punch bowl, turning his back on the local mayor. "It is all plastic. Everyone is selling something. You look like you actually breathe oxygen." He asked about my work as a data analyst with an intensity that flattered me. I told him I liked the order of it, the way numbers never lied even if people did. He listened, nodding slowly, as if I were reciting poetry. "You are so grounded," he said, touching my hand. "You are trustworthy. That is a rare currency these days." Elena, at the time, I thought it was a compliment. Now I know he was not admiring my character. He was assessing my utility. He was vetting me, not for a partnership, but for a position as an unwitting accomplice. Whenever I asked about his family, he would wave his hand as if swatting away a fly. "My family is complicated," he would say, his smile tightening. "Let's focus on us. I want to build something new with you." The trap did not snap shut with a loud bang. It clicked softly, like a luxury car door. 6 months after our wedding, Richard sat me down at the kitchen table with a stack of documents. He poured me a glass of wine and laid a pen on top of the papers. "We need to merge our accounts. Elena," he said, pushing the paper toward me. "It is about transparency. Plus, why should you stress over utility bills and tax filings? I have a team that handles my finances. Let them handle yours too. You just enjoy your life." I signed. I handed over my passwords, my social security information, and my administrative rights. I thought I was building a home, but I was actually signing a waiver of my own autonomy. The control started subtly, disguised as generosity. He began buying me clothes. Beautiful, expensive things that were not my style at all. When I tried to wear my favorite floral dress to a dinner, he frowned. "Elena, honey, that makes you look provincial," he said in front of our housekeeper. "Wear the black sheath dress I bought you. It looks more expensive." Slowly, my wardrobe changed from colorful to monochrome. My voice, too, began to fade. When I tried to talk about my job, he would check his watch or interrupt me to take a call. If I persisted, he would cut me down with surgical precision. "Why do you stress about that little job?" he asked one evening when I complained about a deadline. "Honestly, Elena, your salary barely covers the landscaping bill. You are just a cost in this household, not a revenue generator. Let's not pretend your career matters in the grand scheme of things." I shrank. I stopped talking about work. I stopped questioning why we needed to attend so many galas. But old habits die hard, and my analyst brain noticed patterns even when I tried to ignore them. One afternoon, I saw a digital receipt on his iPad that he had left unlocked. It was for a consultation fee of $5,000, billed to an entity I did not recognize. When I asked him about it later, the transformation was terrifying. He did not yell. He laughed. "Oh, Elena," he chuckled, shaking his head as if I were a child who had asked why the sky was blue. "You do not understand high finance. That is a structuring fee. If I explained it to you, your eyes would glaze over. Just stick to managing the menu for the party." All right. I went to bed that night feeling a cold knot in my stomach. I realized then that the separate accounts and the expensive clothes were not about making me happy or keeping our lives simple. He did not just want to be rich. He wanted a wife who was too intimidated, too dependent, and too confused to ever ask where the money was coming from. He wanted to make sure I had no right to ask questions. It began with a habit I could not shake. Even though Richard insisted on handling the finances, I was still a data analyst by trade, and trusting a system without verification went against my nature. On a Tuesday evening, while Richard was allegedly at a networking dinner, I logged into the National Credit Bureau simply to check my standing. I expected to see a score in the high 700s, pristine and untouched. What I saw made the blood drain from my face. My score had plummeted to 610. I clicked through the report, my fingers cold against the trackpad. There were 5 new lines of credit opened in the last 8 months. Credit cards, a small business loan, and a line of credit for home improvement. I sat back in my chair, forcing myself to breathe. I had never signed for these. I looked closer at the details. The billing address for all of them was not our home. It was a post office box in an industrial park on the edge of town, a place I had never visited. Panic threatened to rise in my throat, but I swallowed it down. If I confronted him now, he would spin a story. He would say it was an identity theft error, or worse, he would claim I was crazy. I needed proof. I needed a map of the destruction. I opened a blank spreadsheet and named it Project Glass. The name felt appropriate because I intended to see through every lie he had constructed. I spent the next 4 hours downloading 24 months of bank statements from the joint account I still had access to. I imported the data into my analytics software. I filtered out the noise, the grocery runs, the utility bills, the gym memberships, and focused on the outliers. A pattern emerged almost immediately. On the 3rd Friday of every month, a transfer of $4,500 went to a company called Serenity Lifestyle Management. I copied the company name and ran a business registry search. It was a limited liability company registered to a woman named Vanessa. I found her social media profile in seconds. She was perfect. Her feed was a curated gallery of yoga retreats, expensive brunches, and vague inspirational quotes about abundance. She looked like a high-end life coach. Then I cross-referenced the dates. I pulled up Richard's calendar, which he shared with me so I would know when not to expect him for dinner. On the 15th of March, Richard was in Chicago for a conference. On the 16th of March, the credit card ending in 4091 of the cards opened secretly, in my name, was charged $300 at a steakhouse in downtown Chicago. On the 10th of June, Richard had a client retreat in Napa Valley. On the same day, the fraudulent card paid for a spa package for 2 at a resort in Napa. The picture became sickeningly clear. I sketched out a risk map on a notepad. He was taking out debt in my name to fund his lifestyle. He was moving money through our joint account to make it look like legitimate income, then siphoning it out to Vanessa under the guise of consulting fees. I was the debtor, he was the spender, and she was the destination. My phone rang. It was Richard. He was calling from the car, likely on his way home from his networking event. I stared at the screen for a moment, composing my voice. "Hello, Richard," I answered. "Hey," he said, his voice sounding relaxed, almost bored. "I am about 20 minutes out. Did you pick up the dry cleaning I did?" I said. I paused, letting the silence stretch just enough to be uncomfortable. "Richard, I got a weird alert on my phone today. Something about a credit inquiry for a business loan. Do you know anything about that?" I held my breath. "Oh, that," he said, his tone dismissing the issue entirely. "Yeah, do not worry about it. I needed to leverage your credit profile for a tax efficiency structure my accountant suggested. It keeps my debt-to-income ratio clean for the investors. It is standard stuff. Elena. Why you are not freaking out about it? Are you no?" I said, gripping the edge of the desk until my knuckles turned white. I was surprised. "Well, stop looking at things you do not understand," he snapped, the charm vanishing instantly. "I told you I have it handled. You just focus on looking good for the gala next week. Okay. Richard. Drive safe. I ended the call and looked at my spreadsheet. The coldness in my chest solidified into something hard and heavy. He had just admitted it. He was not just cheating on me. He was using my identity as a shield. He was building his empire on a foundation of debt that would crush me the moment he decided to leave. This was not a marriage anymore. It was a parasitic system, and I was the host. The office of my attorney, Elias, was not designed for comfort. There were no soft couches, no boxes of tissues, and no soothing art on the walls. It was a war room, encased in glass and steel, overlooking the gray expanse of the financial district. Elias did not offer me tea or sympathy. He sat behind a desk that looked like a slab of black ice and laid out our strategy with the precision of a general. "We are not filing for divorce today," Elias said, his voice devoid of any softness. "We are filing for a temporary financial restraining order. The goal is simple: stop the bleeding. We freeze the assets to prevent dissipation and block the creation of any new debt under your name. If we warn him, he drains the accounts. If we wait, he takes out another loan. We strike hard, and we strike first." I nodded, my hands clasped tightly in my lap. "I understand. What do I do about my paycheck? It hits the joint account on Friday." "Redirect it immediately," Elias commanded. "Open a new account at a different bank. However, we must maintain the optics of a good spouse. You will continue to transfer your exact share of the mortgage and utilities into the joint account. We are not abandoning the marriage financially. We are securing the estate. If the judge sees you cutting him off completely, it looks like retaliation. If you pay your share but cut off his access to the surplus, it looks like prudent management." He leaned forward, his eyes locking onto mine. "From this moment on, Elena, you have no emotions. You do not scream. You do not cry. You do not send angry texts. You communicate only through timelines and documents. If he baits you, you document it. If he begs, you document it. Do not give him a single inch of reaction that he can use in court to paint you as unstable." I reached into my bag and pulled out the gray folder containing Project Glass. I slid it across the desk. Inside were the credit reports, the highlighted bank statements showing the transfers to Vanessa's company, and a log of the new device alerts I had received from the bank. Elias flipped through the pages, his expression unreadable. He stopped at a printout of an email I had received just 2 hours ago. It was from the fraud department of a major lender regarding a loan application I had never submitted. "Tell me about this," Elias said, tapping the paper. "I got it this morning." I explained. The bank flagged the application because the driver's license uploaded for identity verification had a mismatch. They sent a copy of the image they received to confirm if it was me. I pulled up the image on my phone and showed it to him. It was my driver's license, but the photo had been clumsily altered. My hair was darker, my jawline slightly different. It was a digital forgery, likely done by someone in a rush. Elias stared at the screen for a long moment. When he looked up, the professional detachment in his eyes had shifted into something sharper, something dangerous. "This is not just a marital dispute anymore," Elias said, his voice lowering. "If he used a forged document to secure credit in your name, that is identity theft. That is bank fraud. If we can prove he or his associates uploaded this—" He trailed off, letting the weight of the sentence hang in the air. "What does that mean?" I asked, my voice trembling slightly. "It means," Elias said, leaning back, "that we are potentially looking at criminal charges. He did not just want your money. Elena, he was building a firewall. If these loans defaulted, the bank would come for you, not him. He was setting you up to take the fall for a lifestyle he could not afford." A chill ran down my spine, colder than the air conditioning in the office. I realized then that Richard was not just a selfish husband. He was a predator who had been living in my house, sleeping in my bed, and methodically turning my name into a shield for his own crimes. I was not a partner. I was a front. And now, I was the only witness who could burn it all down. The sun rose over the city at exactly 6:15 in the morning, but the real dawn arrived on my phone screen. I sat in my kitchen with a cup of black coffee, refreshing the banking application. At first, the accounts looked normal, flashing the inflated balances Richard loved to brag about. Then, the screen flickered. A small, gray padlock icon appeared next to the joint checking account, then another next to the savings. Then the credit cards. One by one, the digital gates slammed shut. The temporary restraining order had been executed. I knew exactly where Richard was. His calendar, which he treated as gospel, listed a strategic partnership breakfast at the most expensive country club in the state. He was there to impress 2 potential investors for his new venture, and Richard's method of impressing people always involved a grandiose display of wealth. He was scheduled to pay the initiation fees for their memberships as a gift to seal the deal. At 9:30, my phone buzzed. It was a notification from the bank app: transaction declined. Amount $25,000. Merchant. The Royal Oaks Club. I took a sip of coffee. The silence in the kitchen was absolute, but in my mind, I could hear the awkward pause in the conversation at his table. 2 minutes later, another buzz. Transaction declined. Amount $25,000. Card ending in 409. This was the card he had opened in my name without telling me, the one he thought was his secret safety net. He was panicking now. He was trying every piece of plastic in his wallet, sweating in his tailored suit while the waiter looked on with pity and the investors exchanged glances. At 9:35, my phone rang. The screen flashed husband. I let it ring 3 times before sliding my finger across the screen. "What did you do?" Richard screamed the moment the line connected. His voice was a jagged tear of panic. "I am standing at the counter with the Roberts brothers, and my cards are dead. All of them. Even the reserve card. Call the bank right now and tell them it is a mistake. Tell them to authorize the charge. I cannot do that. Richard," I said, my voice steady and cool, a stark contrast to his hysteria. "What do you mean you cannot?" he hissed, lowering his voice, presumably turning away from his guests. "Do not play games with me. Elena, I look like an idiot out here. Fix it." "Now, it is not a bank error," I replied. "It is a court order. The judge granted a temporary freeze on all marital assets and all lines of credit associated with my Social Security number as of this morning." There was a pause on the line, a vacuum of sound where his arrogance used to be. You went to court," he stammered. "Are you insane? Do you have any idea what you are doing? I am closing a deal that is worth $2 million. If I cannot pay this fee, they walk. The whole house of cards falls down. That is the point." "Richard," I said. "Elena, listen to me," he pleaded, his tone shifting rapidly from aggression to pathetic begging. "Baby, please, just lift it for 24 hours. I will give you whatever you want. I will sign a post-nup. I will transfer cash to your personal account. Just unlock the card so I can pay this bill. If these guys leave, I am finished. I am not freezing the money to hurt you," I said, leaning back in my chair. "I am freezing it to stop a crime." "Crime? What are you talking about?" he scoffed, trying to regain his footing. "I am a businessman. I know about Serenity Lifestyle Management. Richard," I said softly, "and I know that the consulting fees you pay Vanessa are coming from loans taken out in my name. I am not going to let you launder any more money through my credit score." The silence that followed was different from the earlier pause. It was the silence of a man who had just realized the laser sight was on his forehead. He did not ask how I knew. He did not deny it. He stopped breathing. "Elena," he whispered, the word trembling. "You do not understand what happens if that money stops moving." "I think I do," I said. It means the scheme collapses. I ended the call. I stared at the dark screen of my phone. For years, I thought Richard's greatest fear was losing his status or his trophy wife. I was wrong. As I sat there in the quiet house, I realized the terror in his voice had nothing to do with divorce. He was not afraid of losing me. He was afraid because I had just cut the power to the machine that was keeping him out of prison. The video call from my in-laws came less than an hour after I hung up on Richard. William and Catherine sat side by side in their mahogany-paneled library, looking like a portrait of old money and older secrets. They did not ask if I was safe. They did not ask why I had felt the need to freeze their son's assets. "Elena," Catherine began, her voice crisp and devoid of warmth. "Richard tells us there is a technical difficulty with the bank. We are concerned about the optics. Does anyone outside the immediate family know about this legal tantrum?" "It is not a tantrum." "Catherine," I replied, "it is a protective measure. We need to speak in person." William cut in, his eyes narrowing behind his rimless glasses. "Not at the house. Meet us at the Meridian Club in the private parlor. 2 o'clock sharp. We are going to settle this like adults." They did not wait for an answer before the screen went black. I realized then that they were not afraid of what Richard had done. They were terrified that the neighbors might find out. The Meridian Club was a fortress of exclusivity on the north side of the city. I was ushered into a small, soundproof room where William and Catherine were already waiting. On the polished oak table between us sat a thick, cream-colored envelope. It looked heavy. "Sit down, Elena," William said, gesturing to a chair. "Let's cut to the chase. You want out. We understand. Richard can be difficult, but dragging this into public court benefits no one." Catherine slid the envelope toward me. "This is a cash settlement," she said softly, her tone sounding almost maternal, though her eyes remained cold. $50,000. Consider it an exit allowance. It is enough to start over in a new city, a new life." "And what do I have to do for this?" I asked, keeping my hands in my lap. "Sign a full withdrawal of your petition," William said, "and sign this non-disclosure agreement. You will never speak of Richard's business dealings, our family finances, or the events of the last 3 years to anyone. Ever. You know he committed fraud," I said, looking directly at William. "You know he used my identity." William sighed, a sound of impatience rather than regret. "Elena, you are being naive," he said, leaning forward. "In this family, names are sometimes just tools to keep the structure standing. Richard used yours because it was convenient. It was a business decision. Do not take it so personally." The callousness of the statement took my breath away. They did not see me as a person. I was just another resource their son had exploited, like a tax loophole. "If you do not sign," Catherine added, her voice dropping to a whisper that was far more terrifying than a shout, "we will bury you. We will drag this divorce out for 5 years. We will drain every cent you have in legal fees, and with our connections, you will never work in this industry again. We will make you toxic." My heart hammered against my ribs. I reached for the pen, my hand trembling slightly, making them think I was breaking. I don't know if I can. I started, "Don't touch that pen. Elena." A deep voice boomed from the doorway. William and Catherine jerked their heads up. Elias stood there, holding his briefcase, looking like a shark who had just smelled blood in the water. "Who the hell are you?" William demanded. Standing up. "This is a private meeting. I am her attorney," Elias said, stepping into the room and placing a recording device on the table. "And you are currently engaging in witness tampering and attempted bribery. I suggest you take your checkbook and leave before I add your names to the list of defendants in the upcoming RICO lawsuit." William's face turned a shade of pale gray I had never seen before. He looked at the recorder, then at me, realizing the trap had been sprung. "Come, Catherine," William muttered, grabbing the envelope. "We are leaving." They hurried out, their dignity shredding with every step. I stood up and looked at the empty chairs. As I walked out of the club with Elias, the trembling in my hands stopped. I finally understood the scope of the battlefield. I wasn't just fighting a greedy husband. I was at war with an entire ecosystem of corruption that would crush anyone to protect its own survival. The text message arrived at 2:18 in the morning, lighting up the dark room like a warning flare. It was from a blocked number and contained only 2 sentences. If you do not want to go to federal prison, meet me at the Silver Spoon Diner on Route 9 in 30 minutes. Come alone. My stomach twisted into a cold knot. I grabbed my keys and drove through the empty streets, my mind racing. The diner was a neon-lit island in the darkness, smelling of stale coffee and grease. In the back booth sat a woman I vaguely recognized. It was Monica, the former junior accountant for Richard's family company who had been abruptly fired 6 months ago. She looked tired, her eyes darting toward the door as I sat down. You are lucky I have a conscience. Elena, Monica said, her voice low and shaking, because what your husband is doing, it is not just creative accounting. It is a one-way ticket to a cell. She slid a thick manila envelope across the scratched laminate table. I opened it. Inside were copies of invoices, wire transfer logs, and contractor agreements. To the untrained eye, they looked mundane. What am I looking at? I asked. Look at the vendor names, Monica whispered, tapping a finger on a sheet listing a construction firm. Red Rock Logistics, Blue Horizon Supply. I checked them. They do not exist. They are shell companies. Empty boxes registered to P.O. boxes in Delaware. I scanned the documents, my analyst brain kicking into gear. I traced the numbers. So he is paying fake companies for work that never happened, I said slowly. He is embezzling from the investors. It gets worse, Monica said, leaning in closer. Follow the money flow. The project funds go to the shell companies. Then, the shell companies wire the money to a private holding account. Look at the account number for the holding account. Elena. Look at the primary holder. My eyes dropped to the line she was pointing at. The account number was familiar. It was our joint savings account, the one Richard insisted we keep for tax purposes but never used for daily spending. And right there, listed as the primary beneficiary, was my name. He is using your account as the transit station, Monica explained. The dirty money comes in, sits for 48 hours to look like legitimate funds, and then goes out as consulting fees to Serenity Lifestyle Management. That is the woman. Right, Vanessa. Yes. I breathed, feeling the room spin. She is his mistress. She is not just his mistress, Monica said grimly. She is the laundromat. She takes the money, pays taxes on it as income, and hands the clean cash back to him. But here is the kicker. To the IRS and the FBI. It looks like you are the one paying her. It looks like you are the one moving the stolen funds. I felt bile rise in my throat. I flipped to the next page. It was a printout of social media logs. There were dozens of interactions between a private account linked to me and Vanessa's public profile likes, comments, tagged photos at locations I had never been to. He created a digital trail. I realized, my voice trembling. He made it look like we are friends, like we are partners. Exactly, Monica said, pulling her hood up. If this blows up, he claims he was a victim of his wife and her friend defrauding the company. He walks away. You take the fall for wire fraud and money laundering. Monica stood up, leaving a $10 bill on the table. I am leaving town tonight, she said. Keep those copies. And for God's sake, get a shark of a lawyer. I sat there for a minute, paralyzed. This was no longer a divorce. It was a setup. I grabbed the folder and ran to my car. My hands shook so hard I could barely hold the phone as I dialed Elias. He answered on the first ring, his voice groggy. Elias, I said, and I was shocked by how cold my own voice sounded. We are not negotiating a settlement anymore. We are going to the authorities. Elena, it is 3 in the morning, he replied. What happened? I have the ledger, I said, staring at the diner through my windshield. Richard is not just hiding assets. He is running a laundering scheme through our joint account, and he has framed me as the architect. If we wait for him to be caught, I will be a co-defendant. We have to self-report. I need to be the whistleblower, not the accomplice. Get to my office, Elias said, the sleep vanishing from his tone. Now. I started the engine. I was done crying over a broken marriage. I was now in a fight for my freedom. I was going to audit every single second of the last 3 years, not to see how much he owed me, but to prove that I was not the criminal he had designed me to be. I checked into a nondescript business hotel on the outskirts of the city under the name Elena Vance. It was the first time in 3 years I had used my maiden name, and seeing it on the registration card felt like taking a first breath of clean air. For the next 48 hours, I did not sleep. I turned the hotel room into a command center. The rhythmic whir of a portable scanner was the only sound as I fed page after page of Monica's evidence into the system, uploading everything to the encrypted server Elias had set up. By Tuesday morning, Elias had brought in a forensic accountant named Marcus. We met via a secure video link. Marcus was a man of few words who looked at numbers the way a surgeon looks at an X-ray. This is not just messy bookkeeping. Elena, Marcus said, pointing to a highlighted flowchart on the screen. This is structured. See these round numbers. 10,000 here, 15,000 there. Legitimate businesses do not pay contractors in perfect round numbers. And the timing. It matches the withdrawal patterns of your joint account almost to the minute. Can we prove he knew I asked? We can prove he signed the checks, Elias interjected. And with the whistleblower complaint we are drafting for the Securities and Exchange Commission, that is enough to trigger a federal audit. We are not just asking for a divorce settlement anymore. We are handing them the map to the body. I maintained a terrifyingly normal facade during the day. I went to my office. I sat in meetings. I answered emails. When Richard texted me, demanding to know where I was, I replied with minimal, calculated vagueness. I need space to process the separation. I am staying with a friend. I gave him just enough silence to make him anxious, but not enough to make him run. Then came the notification I had been expecting. Richard and his parents were hosting the Bright Future Gala on Friday night. It was a desperate move. They needed to project stability to their investors to secure a new round of funding before the cracks in their liquidity became visible. It was the perfect stage. You do not have to go. Elena, Elias told me on the phone the afternoon of the gala. We can serve the papers at his office on Monday? No, I said, staring at the dress I had just purchased. If I hide, he controls the narrative. He will tell everyone I am having a breakdown. I need to be there. I need to see it. All right, Elias said, but listen to me carefully. You do not say a word to him about the investigation. You do not scream. You do not make a scene. The process server is already in place. He will approach the stage at exactly 8:30. You just need to be the witness. I did not dress like the wife Richard had molded. There were no pastels, no soft silk, no diamonds. I wore a structured midnight blue tuxedo suit with sharp lapels and stiletto heels that clicked against the floor like the cocking of a gun. My hair was pulled back tight. I wore no jewelry except my wedding band, which now felt less like a ring and more like a piece of evidence. I arrived at the venue, a gilded ballroom in the city center, just as the appetizers were being served. The air smelled of expensive lilies and desperation. I walked past the security detail, my name still on the VIP list because Richard was too arrogant to remove it. When I entered the room, the hum of conversation dipped slightly. Heads turned. I saw Richard across the room, standing near the podium with his parents. He looked perfect in his tuxedo, playing the role of the benevolent tycoon. When he saw me, his eyes widened, flashing with a mix of relief and suspicion. He thought I had come to crawl back. He thought I had come to surrender. I took a glass of sparkling water from a passing tray and stood near a marble pillar, watching him. I did not approach. I did not smile. I looked at him, and for the first time, I did not see a husband or a monster. I felt the cold detachment of a scientist walking into a sterile lab. I was not there to cause a scene. I was simply there to look through the microscope and watch the bacteria squirm before the bleach was poured. Richard did not just tolerate my presence, he used it. He stood near the center of the ballroom, his hand resting possessively on the small of Vanessa's back. She was wearing a silver gown that shimmered under the chandeliers, looking every inch the corporate partner he had always wanted. When I walked past them, Richard leaned in, his voice low and laced with triumph. "I am glad you came." "Elena," he said, his smile tight and cruel, "it is good for you to see what a winning team actually looks like. Vanessa and I, we build things. You just occupy space." I did not respond. I simply took my place near the edge of the crowd as the lights dimmed. William, my father-in-law, stepped up to the microphone. The room fell silent. He adjusted his glasses, looking out at the sea of investors and partners with a practiced gravity. "Tonight is about the future," William announced, his voice booming. "But to build a strong future, one must have the courage to clean house. We have spent the last quarter streamlining our operations. We have prioritized integrity. And sometimes, that means surgically removing the weak links, the unstable elements that threaten the structure of our family and our business." The room murmured in agreement. Everyone knew he was talking about me. He was painting me as the liability, the crazy wife who had to be cut loose so the empire could soar. I felt the eyes of the room slide toward me, pitying and dismissive. Then, the heavy double doors at the back of the room swung open. It was not a waiter. It was not a late guest. It was a man in a cheap gray suit holding a thick stack of documents. He did not look at the guests. He walked in a straight line toward the stage, his shoes squeaking slightly on the polished floor. The security guards hesitated, confused by his bureaucratic confidence. He walked right up the stairs and stopped in front of Richard and William. The microphone caught the sound of the paper slapping against Richard's chest. "Richard Sterling," the man asked, his voice flat. "You are served." "Get out of here," Richard hissed, trying to shove the papers back, his face flushing red. "This is a private event. My wife's lawyer has no right to disrupt this." "This is not from your wife's divorce lawyer," the man said, his voice loud enough for the first 3 rows to hear clearly. "This is a subpoena for the immediate production of all financial records regarding the Serenity Development Project and the associated offshore holding accounts." The silence that followed was absolute. Then, it shattered. Mr. Henderson, the lead investor who had been ready to sign a check for $5 million, stepped forward. His face was purple. "A subpoena!" Henderson barked, pointing a shaking finger at Richard. "You told me the audit was clean. Why are they asking for the Serenity files? That is where my capital went." "Why is the money flagged?" Richard stammered, his hands shaking as he held the papers. It is a mistake. Jim, it is just a clerical error. Elena. She is just trying to embarrass me." Vanessa, who had been posing for photos moments ago, suddenly looked like a trapped animal. She grabbed Richard's arm, her nails digging into his tuxedo jacket. You said the accounts were airtight," she whispered frantically, but the microphone picked up the hiss of her panic. "Richard, you told me my name was kept out of the ledger. If they have the Serenity files—" "Shut up," Richard snapped at her, forgetting the audience entirely. "Just shut up." "Vanessa." "Do not tell me to shut up!" she shrieked, pulling away from him as if he were contagious. "I am not going to jail for your creative accounting. I was just a consultant." The process server looked at them, bored, and delivered the final blow. "This is a federal inquiry based on a whistleblower complaint regarding wire fraud," he stated calmly. I suggest you do not leave the state. Richard froze. He looked out at the crowd, seeing the disgust on the faces of his peers. The investors were already pulling out their phones, making calls to kill the deal. His perfect life was dissolving in real time. Slowly, Richard turned his head. He looked across the room and found me. I was standing exactly where I had been all night. I held my glass of sparkling water, the condensation cool against my fingertips. I did not smile. I did not gloat. I simply raised the glass in his direction, mirroring the toast I had made on the rooftop when this started. His eyes widened in genuine terror. For the first time, he realized I was not the decorative wife he had discarded. I was the one who had opened the door and let the light in. He was not looking at a woman who wanted revenge. He was looking at the person who had handed the evidence to the executioner. The mediation room was sterile, smelling of lemon polish and stale coffee. Richard sat across the long table, leaning back in his chair with the arrogant posture of a man who believed he could talk his way out of a murder charge. He looked at the court-appointed mediator, shaking his head with a performance of weary patience. "My wife is, confused," Richard said, sighing dramatically. "She has never had a head for finances. I tried to protect her, but when she realized I was filing for divorce, she panicked. She drained the accounts out of spite. Honestly, she cannot survive without me, and this is just a cry for attention." I did not interrupt him. I did not roll my eyes. I simply waited for him to finish his monologue. When the mediator turned to me, I did not offer a sob story. I offered a timeline. I slid a single sheet of paper across the table. "This is a log of device identifiers," I said, my voice steady. The 3 loans taken out in my name were authorized from an IP address located at Richard's private office. The digital signatures were created at times when I was verified to be at my own workplace, logged into my secure server. Richard scoffed, waving a hand dismissively. She had my passwords. He lied effortlessly. She accessed my computer remotely to frame me. She took that cash. Elias, my lawyer, stood up. He projected a map onto the wall monitor. It showed the ATM withdrawals for the cash Richard claimed I had stolen. The cash withdrawals occurred at an ATM on 4th Street, Elias stated. That is 20 minutes from Elena's office, but it is exactly 1 block from the condominium rented by Serenity Lifestyle Management. The timestamps of the withdrawals align perfectly with the GPS data from your car's navigation system. Richard, the room went quiet. Richard opened his mouth to pivot, to invent a new lie, but the door opened. It was the lawyer representing Vanessa, his so-called consultant. He looked grim. He walked over to the mediator and placed a thick stack of printed text messages on the table. "My client is not going to prison for this," the lawyer announced. "She has provided full cooperation. These are texts from Mr. Sterling dated 6 months ago." The mediator picked up the top sheet and read it aloud. The text says, "Do not use my cards for the transfer. Use Elena's profile. If the audit comes, she is the perfect shield. She never checks the statements." Richard's face drained of color. He looked like a man who had been punched in the gut. The narrative of the helpless spendthrift wife had just evaporated, replaced by the reality of a calculated conspiracy. 10 minutes later, during a recess, William and Catherine cornered me in the hallway. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a frantic, sweating desperation. "We can fix this," William whispered, his voice trembling. "We will pay off the loans, all of them. We will give you the house. We will give you a lump sum of $200,000. You just need to sign a non-disclosure agreement and withdraw the fraud complaint. Please, think of the family legacy." I looked at them, at the fear in their eyes. They were willing to buy my silence to save their reputation, but they had never been willing to offer me respect. "I do not want your money," I said coldly, "and I do not want the house. I want my name clean." We returned to the room. The ruling was swift. The debts incurred under my name were declared fraudulent and assigned solely to Richard. I was absolved of civil liability. But as Richard stood up, adjusting his tie, thinking he could still manage the fallout, the back doors swung open again. This time, it was not a lawyer. 2 men in windbreakers emblazoned with the letters FBI walked in. They did not look at me. They walked straight to Richard. Richard Sterling, the lead agent, said, "You are under arrest for wire fraud, identity theft, and money laundering." "No," Richard gasped, backing away until he hit the wall. "No. This is a mistake, Dad. Do something." William turned away, burying his face in his hands. I watched as they handcuffed Richard. As they let him out, he looked back at me one last time. There was no anger in his eyes anymore, only a hollow, shattering realization that he had underestimated the one person he thought he owned. I walked out of the courthouse into the biting cold of the afternoon. I pulled my phone from my pocket and opened my banking app. I navigated to the joint account, which now had a balance of 0, and pressed the button to close it permanently. I had not taken his money. I had not slashed his tires or screamed at his friends. I had simply let him take the rope he wanted, and I watched him hang himself with it. He thought he took everything from me. But in the end, I left him with the only thing that mattered, the evidence of his own destruction. And that was my quiet revenge. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I would love to know where you are tuning in from. So please leave a comment below, sharing your location and your thoughts on Elena's revenge. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to the Lily Revenge Stories channel, like this video, and hit the hype button to help this story reach more people.